People who have had a creepy feeling about someone come true? What happened? Not me, but my mom. My sister was going to visit her friend out of state, so her friend's friend offered to drive her there. He drove a few hours to get to our house and was noticeably tired when he arrived, so my sister suggested that he just sleep on our couch and they'd go in the morning. The entire night, my mom's going in and out of our room saying that there's something off about the guy, that she doesn't really like him but can't figure out why. She actually quietly went out the side door and wrote down his license plate at one point. The next morning, my sister's in his car for maybe 30 minutes before she feels sick and asks him to just take her home, which he does, much to my mother's delight. About 6 months later, my mom was looking at her news feed when she saw a familiar face and called my sister and me over and yelled, "I told you something was off about him." It turns out that about a year earlier, he ended his relationship with his ex-girlfriend, and that his friend, who helped him hide her body, finally decided to tell the cops not because he developed a conscience, but because he was mad at him for stealing his toaster. Good thing that dude's friend has his priorities straight. He'd help a friend in need in terms of burying a body, but if that friend steals his kitchen appliances, it's game on. Story 2. Years ago, I met a man online and we got to know each other through Skype calls and texts. We also met twice in person. He came to visit me and I flew up to visit him. I got to meet his sister, friends, and coworkers. He worked for the school system, worked at a middle school, and was ready to retire. So over a year, we dated long distance. He had already been married 4 times, had grown kids, and had a few grandkids that I didn't get to meet. When I flew up north to visit the guy, he drove me all around to see the beautiful countryside, and we went to the school where he worked. It was lunchtime, and all the kids were happy to see him. They knew he was retiring and were telling him not to go. Pretty sweet, I thought. Fast forward a few months and the guy retires and moves in with me, my adult son, and my elderly mother who has dementia. I had been her caregiver until she passed. The guy had taken care of his mother when she was sick with cancer, so he understood what I was going through. The day the guy arrived, he had towed his car behind a U-Haul and my son helped him move his stuff inside the house. When I was getting stuff out of the back seat of the car, I discovered something I thought was odd for a single man to have. First of all, the seat was covered with a towel. I understand covering a car seat if there were boxes or something to be put on it, but there were no boxes. I then found a toy from a Happy Meal. I didn't say anything about it right away because of all the hustle and bustle of the move and getting things settled in. When it finally came across my mind again, I started thinking there were other things Dee had told me in the past. When Dee came to visit me, we went to a cool shop that sells rocks and other neat stuff. Dee picked up some hematite rocks and showed them to me. He said he got them for the girls. What girls? The middle school girls? Yes. Why? As it turns out, they really liked him and thought of him as a grandfather figure. They had each given him one of their school photos as a keepsake and he had given them a school photo. Kinda weird, but not only that, when I met him in person, Dee was wearing those colorful rubbery bracelets that kids exchange. He got them from them. I told Dee that I didn't think it was appropriate for him to give things to any of them, but he did it anyway. After he gave them the keepsake rocks, one of them told her parents, the parents told the principal, and Dee got talked to about it. It seemed that shortly after that incident, Dee told me he put it in for his retirement. I believed him then, but after he moved in with me, I didn't believe it. He wasn't old enough to retire, and not only that, Dee had slipped up one time and told me he had been fired because he got into it with a student. I don't believe that. He might have gotten into it, but it wasn't a fight on his part, if you know what I mean. I kicked Dee out eventually, but it was because of a few other things that he did. He was a 25-year-old recovering alkie who attended several AA club meetings every day and then every night as well. In my opinion, that's a bit way too much. He started having lunch with someone he said was a guy. Who knows? One day, Dee asked me to look at his phone to see if he had a navigator. He wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I said sure, so we sat at the dining room table and I didn't even bother looking for the GPS. Instead, I looked at his text messages. Several to one of his old girlfriends, telling her he still loved her and missed her terribly. A few to one of his ex-wives, and a few to women he had met at AA. One of the messages he sent was telling this woman he wanted to hook up with her. Not only that, I found out that during the year Dee and I were supposed to be a couple, even though we weren't together, he cheated on me with one of his ex-wives in the woods. She contacted me and told me. She said that she got poison ivy. I told Dee to pack his things and get out, which he did. Several months later, I saw on Facebook that Dee had moved in with a new lady friend. They stayed together for about a year or so, then he dumped her for the woman he's currently married to. Oh, and she told me that after D had moved out, the woman found a pair of lingerie. They weren't hers. Story 3. My mom and I were in a cafe, and she had her handbag down by her feet. This couple came in and sat at the table behind us, and he attracted my attention because he kept poking his girlfriend, telling her how to sit and stuff, and just… The hair on my neck went up. I hate that kind of controlling attitude, so he's in my peripheral vision, and this guy won't sit still when my mom asks, "Hey, where's my bag?" She found it a second later, moved, and opened it. She reached in to get her purse and said, "My card is gone." So the couple behind me had stood and they were walking quickly towards the door, and I didn't even hesitate to say, "Stop that man," because I figured I could apologize later if I was wrong. One of the waitresses was right by the door and she followed him out the door, at which point the guy dropped my mom's card, mumbled something about having found it, and then ran for it. I guess if he hadn't been such an a-hole to his girlfriend, I probably wouldn't have noticed. Story 4. In college, I worked at a bar and they brought in this new bouncer. From the second I met him, I immediately felt like there was something seriously wrong with the guy. His smile and eye contact were too intense. I told a coworker that the guy gave me the creeps, and she told me she thought he was cute and nice and didn't get where I was coming from. He had taken a bartender out after his shift and got weird when he went in for a kiss. She looked him up after and called the owners that night. A quick Google search pulled up his mugshot and articles about how he was watching his college roommate's dog one weekend and treated it badly. The dog thankfully survived and he was arrested. The article also talked about how he was laughing at the police arresting him, saying he knew he wouldn't get into any trouble. He was fired and told never to come back once management found out. Props to this girl for trusting her instincts even though he was quote-unquote cute. Too many people blindly trust others just because they happen to be good looking. Now, if this girl trusted her instincts, the dude in Story 6 was completely blindsided. Check it out. Story 5. So I met this guy on a night out. He was new to the area and friends with my friend's brother. He came across as nice and friendly, but then he started being a bit strange, like he kept making unsolicited advances. We all went back to my friend's house and I was pretty buzzed, but this guy kept trying to get me to leave with him without anyone seeing him. I told everyone something was weird about him. It turned out he had been charged with violating someone, and that's why he had left his previous city. He had also roughed up a kid a few weeks ago before he met me, and the police found he had a lot of indecent materials. Story 6. Back when I was in high school, some new kid joined. I only really interacted with him on the football field, but he really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm not a small guy, I'm big enough to fend for myself, so while he did creep me out, I wasn't really scared of him. I should have been, but ego gets in the way when you're a teenager. All of a sudden, he tried to injure me in discreet ways while playing football, like stamping on my ankle, tripping me up while none of us had the ball or nobody was looking, etc. After a couple of more incidents, he stepped it up a lot. He ended up pouncing on me while I was reading a book. We don't know if he meant to end me or seriously maim me with a sharpened key in his fist. 2 of the blows got deflected by my glasses, which left a giant mark on the lenses and where my temple was. When this happened, the headmaster and all upper management had been away from school for some meetings, so he never got immediately expelled. He just got taken back to his class and spent the rest of the day as if nothing had happened. Luckily, my brother was good friends with the headmaster's son, so my parents actually had his number. When they called him because they assumed he was aware of the situation, he immediately said that he was expelling the kid from the school. I also did file a police report, and he was arrested, but sadly he only received anger management counseling as he played the quote-unquote "I had a horrible upbringing, so it's not my fault that I'm young and enjoy hurting people" card. I also know from a couple of friends that he violated a girl, but she was too terrified to say anything, so I have no right to report it. It's a horrible situation for everyone involved, but at this point, I just hope to never see him again. Other than that, though, I'm fine and I have a cool story to tell. Sometimes you feel bad about someone, but they don't look like they can really threaten you too much, but in reality, they can, and they will. Story 7. My mother, who was extremely emotionally and physically cruel, raised 4 kids by herself. Although she had many siblings and lots of other relatives, no one really helped us. When I was young, my mom had a female cousin who started coming around out of the blue, trying to get my mom to attend church with her, etc. Then, all of a sudden, this same cousin wanted to become my little sister's godmother. Okay, whatever. But I certainly resented the fact that we were all of a sudden being forced to go to church almost every Sunday. I saw it as nothing more than a form of brainwashing. I always had a sick feeling about her, especially when I had to sit near her in a room. Fast forward a couple of years and she starts insisting I come along on weekend getaways she would have with my sister at her house. I had absolutely no interest in going. Not only was I older, but I was thinking, why do I have to come? She's not my godmother. But my mom was so weak minded, psychotic, or just plain evil that she just always forced me to go. Fast forward 2 years. Of course, I was still being forced by my own mother to go somewhere that wasn't necessary with someone who made me physically sick. I still hadn't figured out exactly what it was about her that made me so sick. She was a nurse and she had access to certain medications. It turns out that she was using sedatives on me when I was at her house, then me. I don't think she did this to my sister because she was always just so fixated on me. She just used my sister to get to me. It also turns out that pills lose their full effect on you after you've been taking them for a while. That is how I found out. I eventually woke up in the middle of it one time. Oh, man, I feel terrible about what this girl went through. I hope she realized that none of it was ever her fault. Now, I know some of these stories might be messing you up just a little bit like they are doing to me, but moreover, I think there are real lessons to be learned from these stories, tough as they may be. And if you agree with me, please do hit the like button below the screen and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. I've got more videos you can learn from a thing or two, so go ahead and keep watching. Story 8. I got a bad vibe from the dad across the street when I was a kid. He's a military guy who always seems to be on a power trip. His oldest son and I went to the same school and would occasionally carpool. One day, it was his dad's turn to drive us. His son stayed home sick, but he offered to drive me all the same. Thankfully, it wasn't a long ride, but the entire time he talked about his beat-up Camaro. He definitely creeped me out. Fast forward a couple of years, his wife threw him out one morning. It turns out he had been harming her for a while. One morning, while he was targeting her again, he broke their kid's arm. I never saw him again after that. Story 9. My brother-in-law, he and my sister-in-law lived across the country and I had never met him. They had only been married for a short time, and one time they came for a visit, he just gave me the creeps. When there's something off, you kind of just know sometimes. It's hard to explain. Guess it's in the little things. For example, at family gatherings, he would be playing with the kids while the other guys drank beer and watched sports. One day, I got a frantic call at work from my wife saying her brother was arrested and their kids were taken into state custody. He was alone at home with the kids when the police came, and you guessed it, indecent materials. There were also signs that he violated his own kids, but there wasn't enough evidence, sadly. My kids were never alone with him, ever. He got 20 years, if I remember correctly. Story 10. I used to work at a local restaurant when I was younger. I loved working there, but I ended up quitting because of some dirtbag who was hired. He was in his mid-30s and gave every girl in the restaurant the absolute creepiest vibes. He was constantly saying inappropriate stuff about his past and was just an a-hole to people in general. I hated working with him because he creeped me out and was just also mean. I started trading shifts to get away from him, and one day, a night shift manager was fired and our boss put the creepy guy in a temporary manager position. I immediately went to our boss and told him I was uncomfortable with the idea and explained how creepy he was. My boss leveled with me and said that the dirtbag had no actual manager power and was just temporary until he found someone else. He was just there to run shifts. My boss arranged it so my schedule never crossed over with the creep. One day, a coworker of mine got sick and I was asked to cover her shift. I get there and creep is managing. I thought I could deal with it one night, but a friend of mine called the store sobbing. She had tried to call my cell around 100 times, but it was in my purse. She was crying hysterically and told me she had been violated and didn't know what to do or where to go, but she was horrified and too scared to leave. I told my friend I would be right there and told Dirtbag I had an emergency and would be leaving. It was a slow night and I wasn't needed anyway, but he freaked out and tried to physically stop me, demanding to know my emergency. I tried to sidestep it, but eventually told him what happened to my friend. He burst out laughing in my face and told me that it was hilarious and not an excuse to leave. I told him to go to hell and I shoved past him. He told me I couldn't leave and I said, "Watch me." I went outside and burst into tears. I called my boss and told him I quit after explaining what happened. A few months later, I was working at my new job and a former coworker came in and said they had some news for me. 2 police officers showed up at my old workplace and served papers to the dirtbag. He had been following someone for the last 5 years and it started when she was young. He had also her. Story 11. When I used to work at a deli, we hired a 20-something kid who looked like Ed Kemper sans the mustache. At first, he would amuse us by telling us stories about how he had fought off 8 guys with weapons or how his girlfriend was a model who traveled all the time and that is why we never saw her. Then things started getting bad, especially when someone angered him. I would catch him talking to himself, saying things like, "If I see that witch again, I'm going to stick this in both her eyes." Management got wind of this and canned him immediately. 10 months later, we find out he actually went to prison for attempting to harm someone with a bladed weapon. Man, that dude sounds like he needs some serious anger management therapy. Story 12. I used to have an older, 40-plus roommate when I was younger and living with my mother. He owned the house we stayed in. He tried to convince me at the time that I was not in control of my emotions, and as such, he would say that he would help me to balance mind, body, and spirit. He was also profoundly vulgar and nonstop. Fast forward a month later, and he'd taken it upon himself to confiscate my belongings that I paid for because it's his house, his rules, whatever. We had multiple altercations where he'd antagonize me and make me feel powerless. There was a lot of emotional cruelty there. I had no cell phone, so a lot of the time when this happened, he would turn off the house phone so that I couldn't call my mom while she was at work. I later found out that he'd planned to use physical force against me when my mom inevitably moved out due to all the crap he'd put her through. Story 13. I worked for a call center a few years ago, and there was a guy who sat at the desk across from me. He was about 45, 50, and wasn't married. I'm young enough to be his daughter. He would do anything to talk to me, come by my desk, run into me in the break room, get in the elevator with me, etc. It was excessive, but never threatening, at least not at first. He started to say inappropriate things about my outfits. I never wore anything overly provocative, but I figured he was an awkward dude who did not know how to flirt. I just brushed him off time and time again, but something was definitely off about him. At one point, the secretary came up to me and asked if he was bothering me, and I told her what had been happening. It turns out he did this with only blonde women at the office. He was notorious for pestering them. It started small, but then he would slowly transition into asking them for physical relations or offering to pay for it. Knowing this, I avoided him altogether. I would pretend he wasn't there, even if he was talking to me directly. I'd even catch him staring at me, but he backed down a lot after he realized that I wouldn't give in. So one day I came to work and he was just, well, not there, gone. The desk was cleared off, totally empty. He apparently sent another blonde woman a bunch of flowers and followed her out to the parking lot when she got off work. He had parked his car right next to hers and tried to force her into his car to go home with him, but she got away. He was fired and escorted off the property the next day by police. I'm not sure why he decided to come back or why he wasn't arrested sooner, but he was caught at work and removed. Nothing too eventful, but it is scary knowing that it could have been me that he forced into his car. Story 14. The guy, quote-unquote, couch surfing at my son's apartment had a very twitchy vibe like a junkie hurting for a fix. I asked my son and he said, oh no, he just hates chemicals, he has arthritis or something. He borrowed my son's car, got his fix, and crashed the car. He said he had been carjacked. We reported the car stolen. 2 days later, he was intoxicated in my son's apartment. My son found him and the EMS guy saved him. My son then realized he had issues and started looking for a Medicaid rehab space. Soon after, the guy was intoxicated again on the couch. EMS saved him again. Narcan is a magic. We went to the hospital, told him he could not come back, and to text my son where he wanted his stuff dropped off. We dropped it off at his grandmother's house. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you're also going to enjoy creepy childhood memories that just don't make any sense. Story 4 in that video is way out of this world. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.